They walked into my cabin like they owned it, opened drawers, took photos, laughed. What they didn't know, every single second was being recorded in HD from 6 different angles, and I watched every frame from 200 miles away. This is what happened next. Let me give you the full picture, because context is everything here. About 3 years ago, I bought a small piece of land, 4 acres, about 2 hours outside the city. No neighbors within a half-mile. No noise, just trees, stars, and silence. I built a modest off-grid cabin by hand. Solar panels on the roof, a rainwater collection system, composting toilet, the whole thing. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. Now, and this is important, I want you to keep one thing in your head the entire time I tell this story. The camera system. I'll tell you exactly why I installed it and exactly what it captured before this video is over. Because what those cameras caught, it's so much worse than I initially realized when I reviewed the footage. But first, you need to understand how this HOA situation even started. Because nobody just breaks into someone's cabin without a buildup. There were warning signs, signs I maybe ignored for too long. My land sits within a rural HOA. I know off-grid and HOA sounds like an oxymoron, but when I bought the property, the covenants seemed reasonable. Maintain your land, no commercial activity, basic stuff. Then, new officers were elected. The new HOA president, Thomas Kensington, had a reputation. Neighbors told me he'd been trying to force out several landowners who didn't fit his idea of what the community should look like. He started sending me letters. First about my solar panels being visually disruptive, then about my rainwater barrels being potential mosquito hazards. Then, I'm not making this up, about my tire swing. I responded to every letter in writing. I documented everything, kept copies. I even had an attorney review my responses twice. Here's the thing about bullies with a little bit of authority. They don't stop when you comply. They escalate. And I want you to hold this thought. At this point, Thomas had never once set foot on my property. That was about to change, and he had absolutely no idea what was waiting for him. It was a Tuesday. I was at my apartment in the city, working from home. At 11:14 a.m., my phone buzzed. Then again, then 3 times in rapid succession, motion alerts. From the cabin. Now here's why I had such an extensive camera system. 6 months earlier, someone had stolen tools from my property. Nothing major, but it shook me. So, I installed a full setup. 6 exterior cameras, 2 interior cameras covering common areas, all feeding into a local NVR with cloud backup. Everything time-stamped. I picked up my phone and opened the app. There were 2 vehicles parked at my gate, a truck I didn't recognize and Thomas's white SUV. I knew it from HOA meeting photos. My gate was closed. It has a padlock. I watched live as Thomas and another man, later identified as the HOA's compliance officer, cut the chain on my gate with bolt cutters. Let me say that again. They cut my chain with bolt cutters and walked onto my private property. They spent 22 minutes on my land. They tried the cabin door. It was locked. One of them walked around and tried the back window. They photographed everything. They left a notice on my door claiming I was in violation of 4 HOA codes. I sat in my apartment watching every second of it, barely breathing. I didn't call the police yet because I wanted everything on record first. Here's where it gets worse and better simultaneously. When I pulled the full recordings that evening, I found things the live view hadn't shown me clearly. The compliance officer tried the cabin window and then reached into his jacket pocket. On camera, you can clearly see him attempting to use something to manipulate the window latch. He gave up after about 40 seconds, but the intent was undeniable. More damning, while Thomas was on my porch, he made a phone call. I obviously couldn't hear it live. But my exterior microphone, crystal clear audio, he said. And I'm paraphrasing, that the place looked abandoned and that they should move forward with the next step. The next step. On my legally owned, actively used, fully permitted property. I made copies of everything that night. Cloud backup, external hard drive, USB drive to my attorney. Another USB to a family member for safekeeping. And then I did something Thomas never saw coming. Instead of calling him, instead of sending another letter, I called the sheriff's department. And then I called my attorney, and then I waited. 2 days later, Thomas sent me an email, formal, demanding I attend an emergency HOA hearing regarding my continued non-compliance. He gave me 72 hours to respond. I responded in 4 minutes. I wrote, "I'll be there. Please ensure all officers are present. I have materials relevant to all attendees." That Saturday, I drove the 2 hours to the community hall. I brought my laptop, a printed timeline, and a USB drive. I also brought my attorney, which, based on the look on Thomas's face when we walked in, he did not expect. There were 7 people in that room. Thomas, the compliance officer, 3 other HOA board members, my attorney, and me. Thomas opened by presenting his evidence of my violations, photos he'd taken illegally from my property. I let him finish. Then I opened my laptop. Before we discuss any violations, I said, "I'd like to show the board something." I played the footage, the bolt cutters, the gate, the attempted window entry, the phone call, all of it, time-stamped, HD, unambiguous. The compliance officer's face went white. One of the other board members, a woman who had previously just nodded along with Thomas, literally said out loud, "What did you do, Thomas?" The hearing fell apart in under 10 minutes. Thomas tried to argue the HOA had authority to inspect. My attorney put a copy of the state trespass statute on the table and didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Here's what happened in the 60 days that followed. Thomas and the compliance officer were removed from their HOA positions by a board vote. 4-1, Thomas voting for himself, obviously. The sheriff's department reviewed the footage and issued criminal trespass citations to both men. Not arrests, but formal citations, which go on record and can escalate if there's any repeat behavior. My attorney sent a civil demand letter. We settled out of court for a figure I won't disclose, but I'll say this: it covered every legal fee I incurred, plus enough to finish the second outbuilding I've been putting off. The HOA itself sent me a formal written apology. First time in the association's 22-year history that it ever happened, according to a longtime member who reached out to me afterward. And the tire swing, still hanging. Nobody has said a word about it. Here's what I want you to sit with. None of this, not one single bit of it, would have been possible without documentation, without cameras, without keeping written records from day one. The law was always on my side. I just needed the evidence to prove it. People always ask me, is off-grid living worth the headaches? And my honest answer is, the headaches are never really about the land. They're about people who see someone building something outside their control and decide that's a threat. Thomas didn't break into my property because of solar panels or tire swings. He did it because he couldn't bully me into leaving. And when the cameras showed the world exactly who he was, not me, the whole thing collapsed under its own weight. If you're building something off-grid, on-grid, doesn't matter. Document everything. Cameras, records, letters, dates. It's not paranoia. It's preparation.